The original basic expert rules were not devoid of ambiguities. Some rules were described in a way that could be interpreted in multiple different ways. Some rules contained contradictions. Hello, I'm Colin Green. You are listening to Spike Pit, episode 105. And in this episode, we're going to be taking a look at old school essentials. So, you're listening to Spike Pit, chances are you like role-playing games. And if you like role-playing games, you've probably heard of BX Essentials by Gavin Norman. Well, he's changing the name, and it's going to be called Old School Essentials Retro Adventure Game. And in this episode, we're taking a look at the core rules. And the core rules are exactly that, part of a modular system, and it's the one book that rules them all, the one you can't replace. To quote Gavin, this book contains all the rules that are not dependent on play style, setting genre or game world. The core rules do not assume the use of any standard rules modules, allowing them to be swapped in and out at will. So to round out your game, you're probably going to need to pick up some additional books. Gavin's got a lot of these planned. You've also got the compatibility of the old school in your favour. Your monster manuals, spell books, books about treasure, and for me, like the main one, the one I'm interested in, I always seek out are books that talk about different settings and contain the genre-specific rules, the kind of classes, equipment, how strongholds and advancement works for the genre. Gavin's is Classic Fantasy Adventures. That's the one he recommends if you're a beginner to RPGs. But he'll also be putting out Classic Fantasy Spells, Cleric and Magic User, Classic Fantasy Monsters, and Classic Fantasy Treasure. And of course, you're always free to make up your own modules or any combination of the above. And that's what I really like about modular systems. I'm a bit of a tinkerer, and this kind of freedom means I don't have to carry great big books with me everywhere I go. I just pick up a sort of, they're small A5 size. I pick up a few of Gavin's modules. I maybe throw a few of my own house rules and some of my ideas in there. And I might take something from the Hydra Cooperative, like some of Paolo's stuff on alternative magic systems, and throw that in there, spell books, whatever. You've got that freedom, system's modular, and please yourself. Before I move on, I would like to say that if you're the sort of person that doesn't like a modular system and you like all your stuff in one book, do not lose heart. Gavin does intend to release a kind of compilation of these books into one hardback edition, or I think he's talking about a box set. Now, I don't know too much about this, and I don't want to really say any more until I've had a look or I understand the full details of what's involved. But watch this space. Before we get into nitty-gritty detail, I would like to say that this book is super nicely laid out. It really speaks to me. It's clear, the writing is concise, all the points I'm looking for are there, and kind of where I expect to find them. I was a big fan of BX Essentials and the core rules, and it had a logical layout insofar as it was alphabetical. But if you wanted to be picky, you could perhaps criticise the fact that sometimes the alphabetical nature meant that rules turned up in funny places. Well, Gavin has changed tack, and he has laid this out kind of in a more typical RPG book kind of way. But when I say typical, I only mean in terms of organisation, not typical in terms of quality, because for me, this does stand out from the crowd. It's very functional. I haven't used it at the table yet, but I can foresee no problem at all in that regard. And really it's because he's used this, what some people call a control panel layout, where when you open the book or document, you've got a double page spread with most, if not all, and I think, in fact, I can't think of an instance where it's not, but all the information you need to deal with that aspect of the game is laid out on that double page spread. The other matter that I want to address is this idea of rules clarifications, and I know this is something that Gavin has worked hard on because he's a stickler for the details, and he's actually got a document online at necroticgnome.com where he kind of talks about his passion for rules and some of the thinking that's gone into the clarifications that appear in this rule set. I remember some to and fro chat on MeWe regarding hirelings, wilderness encounters, and all sorts of different things. I've been involved in playtesting, not for this book, but for the Advanced Classes book, and I know these rules are currently out being proofread, and there's stuff coming and going between the interested parties. So, you know, the work is getting done, guys, and I think when you look at this product, you can see the attention to detail, you can see the passion for the game. It really, for me, it really sings. I don't want to be too gushing, but what can I say? I think it's really, really good, and I think it's to be applauded. This is going to be my go-to rule set for running a BX style game, without question. I'm playing Basic Fantasy rules at the moment by Chris Goneman, and I like that set. It makes quite a good transition from 5e for my players. But if I want that real old school Basic Expert, this is where I'm looking. I think it's high time I dived into the table of contents then. Starting off, we've got the introduction, and he talks about the game, required books, compatibility, adventure gaming in general, and explains some of the terminology associated with this and role-playing in general. Then we move into player characters. Explains the game statistics, creating a character, ability scores, alignment, languages, experience, wealth, domains, and the hirelings. Then, page 17, adventuring. Talks about party organisation, time, weight and movement, hazards and challenges, dungeon adventuring, wilderness adventuring, and waterborne adventuring. Encounters, evasion and pursuit, combat, other combat issues, morale, retainers, and vehicles. Then we move into magic. This is page 42. Spells, spellbooks, magical research. Then monsters. Talks about game statistics, general notes, and combat tables. Running adventures is next. Page 50. Adventure scenarios, designing a dungeon, designing a wilderness, designing a base town, and awarding XP. Finally, onto treasure. Placing treasure, items of value, treasure types, magic items, armour and shields, gems and jewellery, miscellaneous items, potions, rings, wands, staves, rods, scrolls and maps, swords and weapons. Closes it out, page 66, the open game licence. So one of the real strong points I mentioned earlier is this control panel approach. Now, I've read out that table of contents, and if in the PDF you click on any of those headings that I read out, the majority are going to take you to this control panel layout. So if I click on Dungeon Adventuring, that takes me straight to a 2-page spread. I can't. By the way, I can't comment on the art because this is like the art has not been finalised. So I imagine that's going to be really good. Also, whilst we're talking about appearance, I did actually mention to Gavin that I felt a little bit of some of the 5e style of font and layout and use of bold text. So people that like that, that's kind of what you get in here. It's a departure from the old BX Essentials, but it is fairly typical of modern RPGs. And whilst I did enjoy the slightly more retro look of BX Essentials and the first set of books, this new design is kind of a little bit more generic, and I think it's going to provide a better basis for the series of books going on, especially as different genres appear in the range. However, I digress. Back to this control panel. So for dungeon adventuring, you're faced with this 2-page spread. It starts off with doors, open, stuck, locked, then the sequence of play in a turn, then secret doors, doors swinging shut, monsters and doors, listening at the doors. All that is on one side, and then on the other page you've got your movement rules, exploring the unknown, resting and frequency of resting, searching, traps and wandering monsters. And it's worth noting here, wandering monsters appears in a paraphrased form. It tells you about the frequency, so a check is typically rolled once every 2 turns. Chance, the typical chance of an encountering a wandering monster is 1 in 6, and distance, wandering monsters are encountered 2d6 times 10 feet away, moving in the direction of the party. Now, this is a typical thing that happens in the rules. A couple of pages earlier, or in fact, 2 pages earlier, so this was mentioned here on 25. If we look back at page 23, there is a expanded explanation of wandering monsters under hazards and challenges. So it covers frequency, chance, monster type, noise or light, and hiding. It explains more about wandering monsters, and it refers where you may also see wandering monsters in the rules, and it gives the specifics. So, as we were just saying, see Dungeon Adventuring, page 24, Wilderness Adventuring, page 26, and Waterborne Adventuring, page 28. So this is the main entry for wandering monsters, and as you might expect, it's under hazards and challenges. Now, I really like that. I hate rules where you don't get page numbers, or you don't get any information whatsoever, and you just end up having to flick around. Now, in your control panel for Dungeon Adventuring, chances are you're going to find enough information under wandering monsters to allow you to get on with the game. You probably don't have to flick back a couple of pages for the full wandering monsters explanation, because that's something you learn about when you're reading the rules. So this happens all the time in this book, and I think that's exactly what I'm looking for in a set of rules and in my RPG products. And I don't like all the flowery chat. It's just got a nice, concise way of explaining stuff that I find really understandable. And the way that bold text is used, kind of almost like in a bullet point kind of way, often without the bullet points, but the bold calls to me, shows me, these are the key aspects of the rules that I need to see, and I don't know, what can you say? It just works. As I flick through the rules, these control panels appear again and again, and for me, everyone's a winner. But there are a couple that stand out to me as perhaps my favourites. One of them is evasion and pursuit. It's an area of the rules in the heat of the game I often stumble over, and in these rules it's all clearly laid out in a logical progression. The tables are there that I need. The sequence of events is there, and I would feel a lot more comfortable, even after all these years, sitting down at the table and pulling this rule book out. I'd know I'm going to find what I want, and you can't undervalue that. Combat is another aspect of the game that's going to crop up often, especially in your fantasy adventure gaming. This is one of the rare rules that basically gets two control panels. There's the more run-of-the-mill combat, shall we say, and then there's a control panel that deals with all the sort of edge cases of combat, and then a page of morale. And morale is labelled as an optional rule, and you've got a page detailing how that all works. Interesting to note that Gavin has clarified some of the Highlands and Retainer type rules and terminology, and under morale we have mercenary morale and retainer morale, clearly different. Retainers, see page 38, signed up to work as adventurers, so are not frightened off at the first sign of danger. Retainers do not make morale checks in combat, but a loyalty check may be required in the face of extraordinary danger. On the subject of retainers, they've got their own control panel, 2 pages again, everything you need to know about retainers. And it's worth noting that the NPCs hired for non-adventuring tasks are treated as hirelings, and they're dealt with on page 16, but in a fairly limited way because they are genre specific. You've got specialists and hirelings that really are kind of more like a resource that are part of the setting. So you would expect to find out all that information in some form of genre book. Magic is 4 pages, and yes, if you've been paying attention, that's 2 control panels. Talks about spells, casting spells, memorising and cumulative spell effects on 1 page, and then the core rules break magic down into arcane magic and divine magic, a column each, and they're explained in 1 page on page 43. You notice we're using the term arcane and divine. This opens up possibilities for different classes and is just that little bit more generic in nature. Then the following control panel deals with spell books on 1 page, beginning spells, adding spells, lost spell books, captured spell books, and then you've got a page with your magic research rules. Chances of failure, creating magic items, creating new spells, and other magical research. 4 pages of magic, that's brilliant. You just add your spells with another book that see, the thing I like about the spells is, if you're familiar with Gavin's books, he breaks them down into the types of spellcasters, and you know that's a genre dependent thing. If you don't have illusionists in your game, you haven't got to wade through a big section of spells when you're trying to find other rules, and that is the problem with some of these big old books that contain everything. A lot of the time, a classic example is DCC. As much as I love that book, you know, it can put people off with the size of it. And to be fair, a lot of that is just random tables associated with spells. When you're trying to attract people to a game, and this definitely affects me, some of those bulky books make you think you've got loads and loads of rules to learn, and more often than not, that's not the case. So Gavin's done away with that with this modular idea. Towards the back of the book, there's a nice section on running adventures, the first part of which is 10 adventure scenario ideas with a paragraph describing a scenario, a plot. So let's take number 7, rescuing captives. Important NPCs have been kidnapped by bandits, wicked monsters or an evil wizard. The PCs attempt to rescue the prisoners, either seeking a reward or because of a personal connection with the unfortunate captives. It is also possible that the PCs may be hired as bodyguards to NPCs who are negotiating with the kidnappers. Once you've chosen your scenario, Gavin then takes you through designing a dungeon, a wilderness and a home town, a base town as he calls it. So you're then more or less ready to go. He explains a little bit about awarding experience, and then we get into treasure. The final part of the book before we get to the open game license deals with treasure. Your treasure tables, placing treasure, rules for magic items, all the stuff you'd expect to find, but not lots of specific detail, because remember, you need your genre book to deal with specifics. Once again, this section is easy to reference, laid out clearly, and as with the rest of the book, does the job perfectly, concise, just what I'm looking for. And there you go, Gavin Norman's Old School Essentials. Hope you've enjoyed this episode. I've tried to give you an indication of what's in the new book, along with some of my thoughts and opinions. Thank you for taking time to listen, and thanks to Gavin for providing me with this early PDF so that I can bring it to you, the listener. Take care, folks, and I'll catch you later.